I
because
think it's
this
something.
starts violating all the way back to the beginning that your body and your mind are yours.
If okay, if you can explain to me a way that you can prove you are 100% autonomous and do not draw upon the work of others for contributing nothing to that work yourself, I'm all ears. But
Oh,
until a way to do that is actually feasible,
actually, I have no.
everybody does draw off of other people's
Yes,
labor.
I have no intention of proving that because you are correct. That's how it works. Just like we're going back to the
Mm-hmm.
early days of the discussion with the hunters working
Right.
together to
Right.
take down the woolly mammoth or something. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody works together. We
Yeah.
we have people that have skills in one realm or another, capabilities in one realm or another, or knowledge in one realm or another. Nobody has the ability to do it all.
Yeah.
Um, like
But making it a la carte is horribly complex.
that's how we generally do it. Like that's how manufacturing and trade operates on its own. Like it isn't managed really. Like people make stuff, they trade with other people for other stuff or services, and that's just how it works. That's how it's been going for millennia.
Mm.
Like the whole like spice trade and stuff, that wasn't a structured governmental thing. It was people that wanted spice, and they knew people over there wanted the stuff they had, so they would
Mm.
go all 1,000 miles over there just to get like a big barrel of spice or something. and
Right.
and that just happens normally. And but okay, so I want to add to another point that's kind of expanding a little bit more, that which goes along kind of with what you had originally said in the beginning, that you have the right to think and express what you want,
Yeah.
travel where you want, construct and modify whatever you want, and to defend yourself and your property and that of others, so long as those actions don't like transgress upon another person, basically,
Yeah.
which would like violate the earlier
Yeah.
concepts,
Yeah.
essentially.
If you have a way to show that you were absolutely like you have a composting toilet, you have solar panels that you constructed from your own labor and your own resources and blah blah blah, like you don't impact anybody else and you can show that, don't
Well,
pay anything,
well, I
like
don't mean
that's fine.
impacting. I'm just talking about like your own individuality, like that. It, for instance, let's say, like traveling. That's a good example. Okay, if there's land that no one's using, that no one owns, and I would say use, cultivation and use of land would be evidence that you own it, right? You can't just say, oh, I've signed this thing and now I own all this land, it's all my land. You can't. No, that it doesn't work like that. It has to be something that you or other people together build or something. But so traveling, right?
Oh,
You could
oh,
travel
that's a good
through
point
an
actually.
unused portion of land freely. You can go
Mm.
from where one country or place to another without
Yeah.
any kind of impedance, as long as you're not like, you know, going traipsing over someone's crops or something, right? Like, okay, well that's not cool. Like, and they would, the
Yeah.
person who owns that land, like they could say, you might have to ask them, like, hey, can I cross your land? And chances are they'd say yeah, or maybe they'd be like, hey, give me a buck or something, or something like that, or maybe they say no, who knows, and you got to go around. But like it's
Yeah.
like, you know what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. Like, I almost think this is kind of like introducing an anti-right. Um, but like there should be kind of a statement that like, where you dwell and where you labor should be considered like um you have like a right to be there, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Um I don't think, much like the Native Americans, you don't own the earth. You don't own any portion of it, right? Like you might dwell there. Yeah. Like, but you don't actually own it. You don't have any right to say you can't be here right now. But like you can certainly express that opinion
I
or
think you do have a
give an
right to say you
argument for
can't
it.
be here right now. Like, as long as it's something that you constructed or modified. If it's something your own
Well, that's
body
not
was
the
involved
earth,
in.
though. If you constructed something, that's different.
Well, I
But
think
I'm
this is
talking about like if you want to walk across my lawn,
mhm.
like you're not really hurting anything.
Well, okay.
So
Okay. There are situations where it's a little bit loose, like somebody walking across your lawn to get from piece of one area to another, essentially doesn't really transgress that much. But now, if that person decides to bring their friends and host a party in your front yard, well, that is a transgression. That was, you didn't give permission to do that. You put this together. It's not their party place. So, or somebody says, "Hey, I'm just going to set up a tent in your backyard and stay here because I can." No, no, no. That's your spot. That's your place. Your backyard. You know what I mean? Like, because you have the expectation of the ability to use it, right? You've put it all together. Maybe you've made a little patio and garden and put up some lights and stuff like that, and you're like, man, it's going to be so good coming home from work tonight. I'm gonna sit down with some
but
brewskis with my friends,
okay,
and we're gonna
yeah.
there's a tent in there now.
Okay, yeah, yeah. But nothing will stop you from then building a fence when that guy is away from his tent, taking his tent, throwing it over on the other side of the fence and saying, sorry,
Well,
this is
and
this
that
is
would
mine.
be, yeah, and that's actually, well, discussion should be
Like
the first
like you don't have to
first thing.
shoot him,
No, 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 no. Well, that would be that's kind of like going over the top, essentially.
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
say, like, okay, if somebody comes into your house uninvited, you certainly would be able to brandish an arm and say, leave, right? That's within your rights.
Brandish, yeah.
Yeah, like say, hey, stop there. Don't come any further. Give them a chance, of course, because there's, again, it comes back to you have the right to exist, and so does everybody else.
Yeah.
So that's a very
Yeah, that
ceasing.
person might have a legitimate emergency
They
and
may, and that's where, again, discussion is
yeah,
important. And
yeah.
obviously, if you are that person, ask permission to avoid any kind of confrontation. That's
Mm,
the easy way to do it. And then if there is a confrontation, hey, have a sit down. Maybe you'll
yeah.
find like, hey, whatever, we'll work something out. But for somebody to just jump in there, like, oh yeah, I could be here. Like, I'm just gonna camp on this patio. It's pretty nice. It's like, yeah, I fucking built it, man. That's my patio. Me and my friends are here. We were gonna like hang out here now. Um,
But I mean, if there is a culture built around like autonomy and rights rather than laws and property and boundaries and borders and stuff like that. Like property to me is just as asinine as country borders.
hmm.
It's made up. It's really like inconsequential whether or not like people want to use it. But um, shit, beer. I forgot my point. Uh,
I get what
uh,
you're saying. Like, and
yeah.
in a certain sense, I do kind of agree, but I think there should be kind of a dividing line between the land or the space that you're using, that
Oh,
you've
that's what I'm
fabricated.
driving at is like the openness to discuss each individual thing between two people
Mm-hmm.
should be like the front line.
Yes.
Like
Oh yeah, I agree.
not this and when we create this like very divided line, like this is my property,
Mm-hmm.
this leaf of the branch of your tree is on my property, you need to
Well,
cut that.
that's where
Like that kind of
diplomacy.
stuff is stupid.
Yes.
We need to have like healthy conversations about like,
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, there's leaves coming over. Yeah, well, I
Well,
mean, like, how's that hurting you? Like, well, I mean, I guess
diplomacy,
not really. Like,
diplomacy and peaceful conflict resolution are, yeah, that
mhm.
should certainly be the core.
But
Like,
you can't force that on people either.
no, you can't, but it's certainly something that people can kind of adopt as a personal philosophy, essentially. Which, again, if your very core tenet is you have the right to exist, that, like, and of course that applies. Like, that isn't
And the
not
right
just,
to express your opinion.
yeah, and that's not you internally necessarily. It's like, as we said, like any sentient, self-aware being would have the right to exist. So that applies to the other person. Because again, it's the transgression. Like, you sure you could do what you want, but if your actions go against somebody else's rights, then,
Yeah.
well, there is going to be a conflict, and that's something you want to avoid.
Yeah.
Um, and
Okay.
again,
So,
here's the thing. Okay, so the last point, I guess, would be that the initiation of force can never be justified, and that kind of goes back to what you're talking about, somebody walking across your lawn. It's like, well, how far what could you consider force, right?
oh,
is it
yeah.
is it
Mhm.
force walking through somebody's forest just to pass through? I wouldn't say so. But
No.
if you spent a decade planting trees and waiting and taking care of this forest so that you could harvest the trees, and somebody comes and cuts them down, that's starting to verge into initiation of force. Like, that just, they took 10 years of your life away from you, which at that point, it's like, well, you might have well spent that time in prison, in a cage or something like that, because it was wasted.
I
It
wouldn't
could have
call
been,
that. I wouldn't call that force though. Like
it's definitely force.
the whole idea of the initiation of force is hugely subjective. I don't I don't know that there's really an objective way to define it because um but that was a big topic of an episode we did on that I was watching a little bit of earlier
Mm-hmm.
that I mentioned. We were talking about what was that? What was that episode about? God, there's been
We
almost
have
250 now.
too
Um,
many.
yeah, but like the concept of the initiation of force is really a strange one for me because force can mean different things to different people, and that if it means so many different things to so many different people, I don't feel that it really has any right being a right, if that makes sense. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because like I could just say anything is a force against my will, right? Which is like too easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a physical force, like if there's a physical force against my body, that's one thing, right?
That's
Like
pretty
that's
undeniable, I
something I
would
think
say.
everybody can agree on.
Yeah,
But it's
somebody.
all that shit in between. Like I
Well,
think the word force has to be tied to one like undeniable, a body or whatever, right? Like
I don't think it has to be necessarily, but I think so.
because your labor, I can't know that. If I'm walking along and I'm like, shit, I need wood for my fire or I'll freeze to death tonight, and I cut down your fucking sapling, and you're like, oh, that took me 10 years. Well, it's like, sorry, bro, but like I'm freezing. This is where expression of opinion
Which,
comes in,
yeah, and
but
preservation of life.
initiation of force, which one takes, which one trumps the other?
Well, that I would say that death is the biggest force, right?
Mm-hmm.
Along with some other
But
things
if
like
you come guns
personal life.
blazing over a fucking tree, you know,
But that's what I'm saying. That's an over the top response to something that probably could be resolved peacefully.
yeah,
And that's, you're almost like, okay, so who's initiating how much force, right? Like,
yeah,
is it am I justified in just like executing you if you cut down a sapling? No. Of course not, because it's one small tiny thing compared to your life as a
And
human being, and your life is the top of that pyramid.
and okay, like what is the initiation of force in this situation where somebody says, you observe
Mm-hmm.
somebody saying to another person, I'm going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to prevent that from happening. At what point, at what decision making point is somebody then initiating the force? Is the force the threat?
It's a
Because a
it's a
threat can
small
be very empty. A threat can
yes.
be very heat of the moment,
Yes,
totally empty, totally benign.
absolutely. And that's a small force. But again, telling somebody you're going to kill them is not justifiable. That's the first thing. That's really the point of this whole
But
statement.
what should the
So it's not
punishment be?
justifiable to say that, but at the same time, it's not necessarily justifiable for you to up the ante and
So
just pull a gun and shoot that person. Now, if that
here's
person pulls a gun
right.
on the person they said, and they pull the gun and they say, I'm going to kill you, okay, that's an imminent threat. Like
Here's the
you
important
are
thing we
justified.
haven't talked about at all yet. And that's the flip side of a right, and that's a consequence.
Mm-hmm.
Rights have to have consequences, right? I mean, otherwise,
Actions have
like,
actions have consequences. I don't know that rights do.
well, okay, maybe it's the wrong phrasing, but like, um, uh, violation of rights. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what what corrective action is there, and who gets to initiate that force?
Well,
You
the
know, like,
person who's the victim essentially.
what if the victim is unable? What if the victim's dead?
Well, that's where that goes back to my point where you have the ability to defend others. Like, so if you see somebody who's, in a wheelchair and there's somebody like rolling them down a hill, about to push them down this hill so they could be dead or something
Okay,
like
okay,
that, like
okay.
then,
How do you know who initiated the force in that skirmish, though?
well, you don't necessarily know, and
Right.
that is
So
always
you
that
can't
is
go
the
and take
case.
action without all the information.
Well,
You,
but
like,
that's
you
what we
can't
do.
sit there and be everybody's like Batman, you
No,
know.
no, no. I'm not saying be everybody's Batman, but if you do see something imminent or egregious, then you should step in.
but
Um,
but what if somebody is correcting the initiation of force from their perspective?
well,
That's
that's
the
where
that's the important thing. Like, we can't allow this to be a right, because it's dangerous to assume that you know all this information.
no, no, no. This is a statement like a ex post facto sort of thing. Like in the moment, you never know. Even like the enforcement branch of many governments, the police, and they don't know what's going on.
Right.
Imagine you come upon a scene at a bar and there's two dudes like punching the hell out of each other. Okay, well, you don't know who started it and what their dispute is about. So the best course of action there is to break them apart, like grab a buddy and like, hey, let's pull them apart and you know figure out what's going on here. You don't want to just step in and start punching both of them because they didn't like that's an unknown.
Mm-hmm.
There are situations where it's much more clear, and there's situations that are not so clear. But those like having the, how can I say it? There's no way to have a system in place like a structure of people or laws or rules or whatever or cops that where they're going to be able to figure that out
I guess the
anyway.
important big picture philosophical point here is there always, well, okay, there are plenty of justifications for initiation of force.
Really, like
Yeah.
what? Name a few or one.
Like the situations I've posited, where you don't know everything. You have to create situations where you Well, like even the one you just provided to me, you have to break them up. You have to physically
Mhm.
restrain two people fighting.
Which,
That
of course,
is that is an initiation of force right
well,
there.
no, actually, it's not. The
Yes,
force
it
was
is.
initiated. No,
That
no,
is that
no.
is that
Hold
is
on.
taking their autonomy away from them.
No, no,
They
no.
want
Hang
to
on.
punch the other person,
They
and you're
took their
stopping
own
them.
autonomy away. The force had already been initiated. They're fighting, punching each other. So there's the force happening, right? You're coming into the situation trying to stop it. You never started. You didn't start the fight between them. Hopefully, you're trying to stop the fight, the force from happening to protect these individuals.
Okay, okay.
So you're not initiating force at all there.
Let me ask you this: two magnets of
Mm.
opposing poles are within vicinity of the other. Which one is initiating the force?
Well, they're both at that point. It's
Exactly.
like gravity.
Exactly.
Well,
You
that
can't say in every situation that just one person initiated the force.
well, it doesn't matter. The point is that it cannot be just
Well,
whoever initiated it. It
because it
cannot be
doesn't matter,
justified.
it shouldn't be a right.
No, no, no.
It's not cut and dry. It's not so
Okay,
easy.
okay, then what's the alternative?
The
If that
alternative is to deal with situations case by case with
who
nuance.
who does that, and what are the rules for that for
Well,
engaging
I mean,
those?
that's what we've been talking about the whole time, right? Like,
Well, but
is creating a system where it's much more general. When you're talking about the initiation of force, that's 100% subjective.
it's not. It's 100% non-subjective. I mean,
Of
the
course it
term
is.
force may, like we said, we were going. There are levels of force, so
Like
that is
me
something to
chopping
consider.
down a tree to warm myself so I don't die isn't, in my opinion, a force, but to you, it was a force.
It is, yeah, because if you're
So that
now,
that
let's okay,
automatically is by definition subjective.
ignorance is not like part of the equation. Like, okay, if you didn't know that this was someone's cultivated forest and you cut something down to warm yourself, you didn't initiate force. It's
Yeah, but
willful
if
initiation.
you come swinging at me, it doesn't matter if you right now define that as over the top. That could very well happen.
But that's a force that's like not necessarily balanced against the other. Like, I'm not justified in killing you because you cut down a sapling.
Okay,
Because
what
your
force is
autonomy,
justified? Because if I break into your house, shooting me isn't justified.
it's
But
justified
you
if,
have in the past justified that as a force worthy of taking somebody else's life potentially,
well, when you,
just based on the premise of maybe they intend to harm me.
well, isn't that self-preservation is important? It's like, why it's doing that is no different
Right.
than
But that
having,
involves you justifying a force against their body.
well, okay,
They're justifying
okay,
they're
look,
they're
okay, wait,
forcing
hold up.
your property,
There's
but
there's
you're
a
about to take their life for breaking your door down.
there's a chain of events here. Okay, I did not I didn't like compel that person to come into my house. They
No,
did it of their own accord. So they started that chain of events. That I like,
not
I'm
from
minding
their
my own
perspective.
business and somebody kicks my door down and starts grabbing stuff.
They
They
don't
had a
know you're
choice.
there. They don't know you're there.
What
If they take
it's a
your
house.
VCR, it's
It's
not going to end your life.
is it
It's not.
their house? Is it their house? If it's not their house, they don't have the right to do that. They could break their own door down and take their own stuff if
No,
they
if
want.
they're assholes, sure, but they don't deserve to die for that.
Well, I'm not saying they necessarily deserve to die. I
Yeah,
don't
but there's
think that's.
plenty of situations where people shoot intruders
Mhm.
and they're totally justified in that. And I think that's bullshit.
Well, I mean, what else do you do in that situation? Just let them take your precious
You
mementos
can
from,
brandish your weapon and say leave.
yeah, which is what
And if they
99% of
and
the
if they and if they don't leave,
99%
you
of the
know what?
time
Like,
that's what happens.
and if they don't leave, well, fine. They take your shit. But if they don't kill you, at least you're still alive.
Well, that's a choice that you would have to make. Like, how valuable is
Yeah.
this compared to
But in
somebody's
my
life?
opinion, if you decide to shoot them because they don't leave, you have initiated the force against their bodily autonomy.
No, you haven't, because
Yes, you have.
you're sitting on your couch minding your own business. Okay. When did you initiate force? What
When
if
you
you were
murdered
okay,
them.
look, if you were left to your own devices, you'd be simply sitting on your couch watching TV for the rest of the day.
Hmm.
Something happened that changed that caused you to pick up your gun. What is that? It's another person deciding willfully to enter your property. It's not their property, it's yours. And we could get there, things do get a little bit more gray when, let's say farmland or something, you have this whole huge area, somebody puts a foot on a corner of like a 10-acre property. Okay, well, that's obviously very little force. Like, you have stepped on some grass, no big deal. Most people don't even care about that. But now, if somebody comes into your 10-acre property of corn and starts burning it, that's your livelihood there. That could be your kids
Hmm.
being fed. That could also be your house burning down and potentially people dying. Your bedridden grandma that you can't get out from the house in time. Like, so that's a little bit, that's a higher level of force. And I think
Is
that's comparative force is something to consider in that case.
Yeah.
But it
I
can
mean,
never ever be justified. Justify for me the person breaking into your house and taking your shit. How logically, how can that be justified?
if
That's the
that's what
first
they
force
need to
step.
if that's what they need to survive. Like
That is not the only choice.
it's a common philosophy within churches, I think. Like if somebody comes in and like grabs some money from the basket of tithing or whatever, I've heard of priests being like, you know what, if you need that to survive, go ahead and take it,
Sure, sure, and that's
and
their
they diffuse
choice.
the situation or
That's
whatever.
that's their
But it's
choice.
like,
But if somebody takes what you need to survive, your last bit of money that you were about to go take to the store and buy food or formula for your baby, and they stole it,
but
well,
you
now
don't
they've
have to
impacted you.
ramp it up to 11. Here's the thing.
That's not an
Let's
outlandish scenario. And
No,
here's the
but
thing that
take the
if
gun out of the
okay,
situation though.
look,
Like
no,
go
no,
to the
no, I'm talking
defense. Go to
about
the defense.
initiation of force. This is the let's stick to that. Like, just simply the person breaking into your house. Like, it doesn't matter that they quote need it to survive. They don't. That's not the only choice out there. Okay, maybe if you were like that one episode of Star Trek where the whole planet was obliterated except for one tiny house with one little patch of land, and it's like this is the only house and the only bit of land on the entire planet. Okay, I could see people being a little desperate there, but like, there are millions of options. That is not theft of somebody else's stuff, is not the only option. And you're also, when you're taking the fruits of someone's labor, you're taking part of their life away from them. So some of my life that I burned, that I only have a finite amount of life, like I consumed it to get this thing, whatever it might be it like a VCR or, well, a TV,
Okay,
let's
well,
say.
okay.
Like,
So the
that
important
was
thing to point out here is that force is maybe a little bit too general because it you can be driven to the point where you feel forced to take an action, yes,
mm-hmm.
but whether or not that action directly leads to you living or dying, um I mean, that's the question, right? Like if somebody burns all your crops, you actually still have other options too. Like it's not as
That
black and white.
doesn't
It's
justify
not
burning
as
the
black.
crops.
No, it doesn't justify that. But like this is exactly why there has to be systems of agreed upon boundaries of justice, right and wrong, like general rules of getting along with one another. Like
Well,
I
okay.
think we're fleshing out the exact reason why like people can't really just one to one agree upon how to live harmoniously with one another.
Well, yeah, they do.
They
I mean,
have
we do it
different
every day.
ways of
We do
seeing,
it all day long, every day. We
but we each
involuntarily
do what we need
sometimes.
to do to survive. We each do whatever it takes to survive. And that will always, 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 always involve initiating some kind of force upon another person, meaning something they don't like, whatever that is. If it's taking
Always?
something from them, if it's taxing them, whatever it is, somebody, we all have to do things we don't like.
Well,
We
typically,
all
like, I mean, if
have
you're
to
okay,
do things we don't like.
well,
Each and every one
exactly.
of us,
If
100%.
if you're the only person on an island, yeah, you may not want to build yourself a shelter, but you're gonna have to if you want to survive. You may not want to go forage and eat this gross ass plant, but it's the only thing there that you can actually eat. You know, you may not want to collect rain and hold off feeling thirsty for a day or two while you wait for the next set of clouds to come over. But yeah, maybe you want some fruit juice, but there's no fruit. So you're drinking water. That's all you got. That yes, of course. We all do things we don't want to do. That
Mhm.
whether you're one person alone or billions of people on a planet. Like everybody does things they don't want to do. I don't want to
Yeah.
necessarily get up every day and go to work, but
Yeah.
it pays the bills, you know, like, or it allows me to get some stuff that I like. It fulfills something. It enriches my life at least a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, there would be things I would love to do to do that. If we could do this show and have that be the means of
Yeah.
getting the resources that both of us need and desire. There's
Yeah.
a component there too, because like, of course, you can
So head
always
to patreon.com/KSM vidcast to make our dreams come true.
exactly, yep, yeah. But people exchange these things voluntarily, like stores that exist. The store was built because somebody they're like, hey, I have kids I want to raise. I think I'm pretty good at selling groceries. Or I have this idea to make the best grocery store ever. So they build the grocery store and there it sits. And people walk in the door. Nobody has to force them to come in. They walk in and they see prices, whatever the price might be it like shells or Bitcoin or dollars or whatever, you know, like,
Mhm.
and you collect the things you want and you go up to the counter and they total it and you give them whatever they're asking and then you walk out with the stuff and everybody wins. Like nobody, there's no force at all there, and that scales up to all of human interaction,
Yeah.
except when you get like governments and militaries and borders and shit like that involved. These artificial kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's not like all the national forests in the U.S. is like actively using, but yet it claims dominion over it.
There's just so much shit in the middle that, I mean, we can't even like fully foresee, that is left a little bit too wide open by such an idea. Like,
Yes, it is. It's open ended.
so like, if I'm not mistaken, George Floyd was at a convenience store and may or may not have paid with a counterfeit bill. There's no saying whether or not he knew that was a counterfeit bill.
Mm-hmm.
And then ensuing actions involved police being called, and then George Floyd was killed on camera by a police officer kneeling on his neck.
Mm-hmm.
All of that happened from a perceived initiation of force against this little mini mart trying to take a Twinkie with a fake piece of made up currency anyway. Like, and somebody lost their life over that. Like, and each person involved in that felt they were justified in doing what they were doing. He was trying to buy his Twinkie or widget or whatever he was buying. The mini mart store owner was like trying to, you know, control their inventory, quid pro quo, get money for their product, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like from everybody's perspective, they thought they were doing the right thing and somebody else was initiating force on them. But it's from their perspective.
Well, and that's
And
where
from other perspectives, it probably looks like complete and utter bullshit and
okay, look,
totally
I
unfair.
think you know, I agree, and that's where you have to weigh the level of force on a scale to
Mm-hmm.
see how like big of a deal it is. But again,
But who's
it
weighing?
can it's not a matter we're getting caught up in like the definition of force. My point is that the initiation of force can never be justified. There is no
The
logical
definition of force
justification,
is vital to that, though.
however little it is, whether it's a small force or a big force, it can never be justified. As by force, I mean it's willful. You decide to do this thing, not an accident. That's not, you didn't initiate the force. It just happened. You know, ignorance or whatever. Like, oh, I didn't know, or the car fell apart and I killed this baby that was on the side of the road or something.
Right,
Yeah, okay,
right.
you didn't decide that. But when somebody decides to do something, however small or however big, that when
Uh-huh.
they start that chain of events,
Okay.
that cannot be justified.
Did George Floyd intend to use a counterfeit bill or not?
And he may not, like, it may not have been counterfeit, and he may not have even known that it was counterfeit. And that's where, again, we have to put
Right.
things on a scale and be
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, is this really worth this reaction to things? Because
Mm-hmm.
if it turns out that he didn't know that it was counterfeit, or that it is in fact not counterfeit, well, then the cops initiated force. They were the start of all that. Like he
Mm-hmm.
was ignorant of the whole thing. Maybe he wasn't, but I mean, again, too,
which
it's like
which
the
ultimately was the findings of the court, you know,
Mhm.
like the police did initiate that force.
Yep.
But like, I don't know. In order to qualify that as a right, I
Well,
guess.
it's more of just a general statement than a right.
Hmm,
Like it's a final point that kind
yeah,
of encapsulates all of this. And you know, it's like, again, the very first thing, the top of that pyramid, is that life is sacred, essentially,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's yours, and that applies to everybody. So your own life is yours. Everybody else's life is theirs. And so like taking a life is probably the biggest possible thing you could do. And so taking a life over uh, a
What
stolen Twinkie bar is probably a little excessive, but
what what about what about this compromise? What about phrasing it as any initiation against the immediate threat against your life and limb is not justified? Like,
well,
because
but it's okay, but that ignores the property side of things.
yeah, and that's fine
So you
because
don't mind if I fly over to, well, I wouldn't fly, but let's say I sail to Germany, I come into your place and just grab your stuff. That's okay. Like you'd be like, well, guess that's the way the ball bounces. Like, oh well, Eric's got a cool guitar now. No,
I mean that's a slippery slope sort of straw
but
man
that's,
way
you're
of
saying that property is irrelevant, which again, property is the product of your labor. That is the product of your own self. Like you
I'm
gave
not
of your
saying
life.
I'm not saying there couldn't be another way of addressing that issue though. I'm just saying that like when it comes to the initiation of force, I feel that's way too gray, way too subjective of a phrasing, let's say.
It could be, but the
Um,
point is, it isn't that it. Okay, the statement doesn't allow you to do whatever you want. It means that after the fact, if you choose to do a thing that is initiating force, it is unjustifiable according to this logical structure.
because
That like,
remember, though, in my opinion, property is just as ridiculous as country borders.
So why do you even
So
have property?
I don't know. Like honestly, like I said, when you construct a house or purchase a house that can somebody else has constructed for you,
Mm-hmm.
that at least makes sense. But when it comes to like my lawn or the trees that are in my lawn, whether or not I've labored upon them or not, like I mean, like if I built some art downtown for everybody to ooh and ah over, and somebody went and vandalized it, I wouldn't feel some kind of right to go Batman their ass. Like
I wouldn't
it would just
necessarily
be like a
either.
shitty thing, you know, like it's not really like force upon me.
Well, no, but again, it's not giving you a license to do what you want. It's saying, all I'm saying is the initiation of force cannot be justified. There is no justification for it. That doesn't mean that because of that statement, you can just go like
But what
wild with
consequence does that invite?
it, it varies. It's something that's up to discussion. But the point is, like, I want to
Yeah.
create a simple framework upon which we can build societal rules, essentially,
Yeah.
that keep the
Okay.
peace.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if it's that simple, if it's like I have a grievance I would like to voice, I
Mm-hmm.
feel I was forced into a situation I didn't like. Okay. If it's that simple, you know, like
Well, it would be so like let's say, um, like according to that, I think it would be fair if somebody walked into your grocery store and just ate an apple. I think it would be fair to reach into that person's pocket, grab their wallet, and take the dollar value or what the monetary value of that apple from them and keep it. That's basically a fair trade, right? Like if you say, just don't come back, just give me the money for the apple, everything's fine. That's an equal trade. That like there's no, and if you look at the level of force, that's very similar. Like, hey, they stole an apple from you. You're stealing an apple of the people. um, they stole an apple from you. You stole the money that apple's worth from them,
I
which would
mean,
be basically no different than if they had walked up to the counter with the apple and paid you for it. So
yeah. Yeah. I
that's
mean,
a
the argument
levels
could be
out.
made that you're violating their bodily autonomy while they're violating your property autonomy.
Yeah,
But
except you didn't make them take that apple. They decided to take the apple. So they kind of started the ball rolling there. So
mhm,
they basically initiated that.
mhm.
And so I think it's fair to respond in kind. If if somebody's threatening your life or someone else's life, you have the right to threaten them back.
In
You
the
know.
context of the way things are now,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to theft of property, like as a store owner, you always have the right to write that off.
Mm-hmm. You could,
So
but you
like
don't have to.
your actual losses are minimalized at least.
Yeah, but one apple could be 1,000 apples, and at that point, that may not be insignificant. So
No,
like, and
but
and just because like maybe you can write something off or insurance will cover it, well, there that's not justification for those actions. That does like, oh well, yeah, they could, because
no.
for one, if you burn
I'm not
down,
saying it should be legal to steal things either. I mean,
no.
it's not binary, you know,
Mhm.
like it's not one thing or the other. It's just that like
Well, basically, when you're stealing from another person, you're taking some of their life away from them. Like they labored to do that thing or acquire that thing that burned some of their life, and now you are taking it and possessing it. You're taking it away from them. They had a thing that they labored to do, and now it's gone, and now it's yours. You did not labor for it; they did.
what if okay, what if the initiation of force is not justified, but the retribution does there's no right to exact retribution without arbitration.
Well, I certainly agree with that. Now, in the moment, right? Like if you catch somebody
Now,
stealing
if
an
your
apple,
life is in imminent danger, I absolutely agree. You can take force.
yeah, yeah, okay.
But
So in the case of the apple, if you are the shopkeeper and you witness a person take the apple and consume it,
mhm.
and you walk over them and grab their wallet and like, give me like, there, yeah, okay, here's the change back for
Yeah,
that 59 cents or
no need
whatever.
to call the cops. Yeah,
No, but
yeah,
that's fine. But
yeah,
now, if you happen to notice you're short on apples, right? And you go back and look at security footage and you see somebody munching down apples, okay, you don't, that's not within your right to track that person down and break into their house and take
right,
their shit in
right.
response. There should be an arbiter, something in the middle
Yeah,
to resolve that.
I like that. I like that specification. That feels like a happy medium. That feels like there's accommodation for in the moment immediate threat to life. It feels like there's uh, a justification for taking action against a wrongdoing, and it feels like there's uh, clear delineation against committing a wrongdoing.
Yeah.
That feels like a super well defined, well fleshed out, discussed sort of right. You
Yeah.
know,
Well, actually, yeah. So this is our Federalist Papers, I guess. This video.
I mean, this is kitchen sink microscopy is what it takes to create like a proper government. I think
Mm-hmm.
like
Well, and I have I didn't just like wake up one day with these ideas. This is like decades in the making, and like my own personal philosophy will say, um, and I enjoy challenging that. Like I want challenge. I want to see, like, can this pass the test essentially, and
that was
are there potential
an
other
awesome like hour where we like came together and like created like the greatest right ever.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you never know. Like this discussion could go into all the stuff that you were writing. Maybe there's some new ideas. I mean, I've certainly thought about things I didn't think about necessarily, at least not in those specific ways. Um, but it's important, I think, because it's
Mhm.
like I would ultimately, I don't want to be right. I want I want things to be correct, essentially. That's basically what,
Mhm.
like, to know the truth, or as close to it as we can get. That's the goal. And the only way to get there is to challenge presumptions. And that's a healthy thing. Have
Yeah,
debates, discussions, and
yeah. I
not
mean, like,
resort to ad hominem. That's the important thing. You'll
yeah,
note that we have not called each other names at all.
ever, yeah.
Yeah, like, God, yeah. God, yeah, no, I don't think
And
even
in
early
like
days.
249 episodes, we've disagreed plenty, but we've
Yeah,
never.
maybe in jest we have, if I recall. I'm sure there's a few jokes, like friendly jabs, but yeah.
Usually Red Dwarf
Mhm.
jokes.
Red Dwarf or Star Trek related.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean that like that's the point is to take in as much perspective and differing views as possible and try to find understanding, try to find a happy medium, try to account for nuance,
Mhm.
and almost always that requires like a happy medium between generalization and specificity.
Specificity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, we kind of just war gamed our own philosophies here.
Yeah.
If you think about it, like you had mentioned right in the beginning, like that's
Mhm.
kind of what we've done. Just play out some scenarios and just kind of logically work through it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like that takes into account like the feeling of being offended, being forced upon, and the ability to uh, exercise your own force in response.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
like being offended, you then have the right to express yourself
Yeah.
to other people or that person or whatever, um, and express yourself in a way that counters that. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's perfectly fair. And that being offended, I don't know if it's always a force. It might almost be a force that one puts on themselves, because
Yeah.
like that's very. But the proper course of action to respond to that is to respond to it. Like,
But I mean, being offended is in essence could be defined as subjectively
mm,
as an initiation of force.
it,
And that was the
yes,
point I
okay,
was driving at, is that like
it could it
it's
could
it's a
be.
little bit too subjective, as in like somebody super sensitive
Mm-hmm.
could overreact to something that most people would agree is not such a big deal, you
Yeah,
know.
and now, okay, you're right. It could be considered an initiation of force if you willfully do it, right? So you say, "Excuse me, ma'am," and they're like, "It's sir," and you're like, "Oh, okay, ma'am." Like you just like willfully misgender somebody, knowing that they said that. Okay, that's starting to go into that territory. Like you had the choice to
Mhm.
to accept that or whatever, or just whatever, but you chose to then do something that could be offensive to people, or
Yeah,
that somebody doesn't like certain phrases and you say them anyway, like
yeah.
calling people by a certain name or something like that. Like,
But
okay,
even then, it's arguable whether or not that really like threatens their life, even,
I
you
wouldn't
know.
say it does. I suppose it could if they were extremely shaky,
Right.
but I would consider that to be a minor force, which
Yeah.
requires a minor response. Like,
Yes.
that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to extricating a person from your house, um, you may have to resort to a greater force than that. Like, it's like, okay, let's say you're evenly matched, right? Let's say you and I, we've sparred and we can't beat each other. But then you one day break into
Elon
my house.
Musk versus Zuck.
And one day you break into my house, right? And you're like, I'm gonna get you, motherfucker. Um, and I know that in physical combat together, we cannot best each other, but I want you out of my house because you're in there wreaking havoc, like smashing things, knocking things over, whatever, doing stuff. And I
Hulk
want you out of there.
smash.
Yeah. Um, I think at that point, escalating things a bit would be justifiable. Like, okay, I know I can't. Now, in the unknown, obviously, you don't know. Like, neither of us knows our combat skills, right? Um, a perfect stranger, you certainly don't. You don't know what that person can do or not. Like, it could be a big, huge guy who's super, a huge pushover. Like, you slap him in the face and he starts crying. And then you got this skinny guy who's like a ninja, and like, yeah, you can't even get close to them and they'll kill you with a look, right? You don't
Basically
know.
me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I
So, if I could in post add like a
am a skinny
like,
ninja.
if I could make like an anime like pshing, like thing, oh, that'd be great. But in that case, it's kind of like in the unknown. You just want to get somebody out of your house. I think it's justified to like present a weapon of sorts or a threat to them in some way.
Mhm.
Bring out the dog or whatever, that, whatever you've got.
Yeah.
I think it's fair. And you can't say, well, because the possibilities could be like, there's all these possibilities of what somebody is capable of and what they might be carrying. You have to also have at hand one of everything, right? If they got a knife, you got to have a knife. If they have a
Yeah. I
bigger
mean,
knife, you got to have a bigger knife.
I
You know,
get the point of like force laws, but it doesn't really take into account the heat of the moment.
uh huh.
And I mean, there is no perfect way to legislate any heat of the moment anything,
No, no.
if
It's
we're
it's
being
just something.
honest.
It's something that needs to be evaluated after the fact, really.
Exactly. And that's why I'm hesitant to make any kind of right be either too specific or too vague. It really should be phrased in such a way that there's always a discussion.
Mm-hmm. Well,
If we're looking at it like after the fact. And
mm-hmm,
and I'm really like that's the only way any kind of like law can observe something, right? Like
mm-hmm.
law is never in the moment. Law
No,
should never be in the moment
no.
because that implies that the enforcer is the judge and jury.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to move away from that
Yeah, I agree. Well, and
because
and
that's a
like
problem.
part of my philosophical belief is like having a very basic set of principles that become part of the culture would avoid all kinds of conflicts and things like that. It's like
Mhm.
you can have a core set of things like, okay, well, let's go back and look at this and see where things come back to. Like, was that a justified thing, or that kind of thing, or can we do these things? Um, like, I think it's important, but it's also equally important to have sort of a culture
Mhm.
around that goes broader than that. That like, okay, these deeper concepts are more widely understood, even if they're not expressly stated, and that you don't necessarily need to have a law to have people behave a certain way. There is no law stating that people have to line up in a grocery store, but yet they just do. And oftentimes, it's like there's no law saying like, oh, when the old lady that with the cane gets on the bus, you have to get up and let her sit. But people do that and they shame each other if they don't.
Mhm.
Like they make you feel bad if you're like sitting there. Oh, I got this chair while the old lady's like, oh God, I can barely hold on. You're the people around you are going to be looking at you funny.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't have to be written.
I mean, yeah, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if conflicts were forced to be resolved in a KSM style
Yeah.
situation where you put two people on webcams where they can't come to fists
Mm-hmm.
and give them beer
Yeah.
and have them talk out their differences.
Yeah. With the
Like
with the
we
goal.
came at this episode with like very different ideas of what rights
Mhm.
are, and we came to a point where we were like, we finally found the right where we were like, yeah, we don't
Mhm.
agree on this at all, and then we like found a point where we were like, you know what, that kind of makes sense
Yeah.
when we phrase it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's achievable with almost anything
Yeah.
with enough
Exactly.
beer
Yep.
and and,
And
and
conversation.
enough restriction from getting out of hand, like
Well, and that's where like the sit down comes in. Like the mafia has that. If there's a
yeah,
conflict, they
the
do not.
Heineken ad, like
Yeah.
whatever, like
Yeah. You have a
anything
sit down,
disarming.
and yeah, you wait, you cool off, and then think about it, and then people express their positions, like their rationale or whatever, and then having an arbiter is helpful. Somebody
Mhm.
who's wise that maybe is also good at keeping people reined in so they don't get out of hand.
I
Um,
even thought about this earlier. Like I was eating dinner or something, and I was thinking like I forget why I was thinking about extortion. Oh,
mm,
I think we mentioned it in the taxation is theft
yeah,
episode. Because tax is kind of extortion textbook.
yeah,
Um, but when it comes to like the mafia, I was thinking like, well, there could be a situation where you're like, okay, you know what? Like, you want protection money from me, but what if I paid you a little more and I got something else in
hmm,
return? Like there should be that negotiation
yeah,
aspect when you're in a position where you're forced to do something you don't really want to do, but it
hmm,
it kind of can't be any other way. Um, and that's not necessarily the case with the mafia, but when it
hmm,
comes to the government, we don't have that option, right?
Exactly.
If we had that option, like that might be kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, but when it comes to the mafia, you could be like, like when Bruno comes in and
Mm-hmm.
he's like, all right, you got to pay $100 a month, and we'll make sure nobody, knocks over your place at night. And they say, well, what if I paid 200 a month and you directed people into my bakery?
And keep the
Like,
people away at night.
yeah, like, it's things that we classify as crime. On the flip side of rights, like the things that we consider crime also have gray areas.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Like,
Well, and the ability to negotiate that I think we do that all the time. I mean, just because they threaten like, oh well, it'd be a shame if your place burned down, um, or but we negotiate all kinds of things all the time, all day long. And honestly, if you are actively looking for that, like voluntary interactions and how people create these sort of temporary contracts with each other, agreements, how they negotiate things, you'll see it happens all the time. Even little tiny things like, oh, hey, why don't you go first in line or something? That kind of thing.
yeah,
People just do that. Like it doesn't have it's unwritten, but it
yeah.
happens.
Well, and stuff like that. Sometimes you don't even get anything in return. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
like
Except
it's
having to
just
stand
kindness.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
That does actually occur in the world
Oh
still.
yeah, absolutely. Altruism is a thing. Maybe not like I wouldn't say there's such a thing as an altruistic person, but there are certainly people who behave altruistically at times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I
And
think I think
even
everybody does at some
yeah.
point.
Oh yeah. Well, and even people who seemingly operate in a self-serving fashion actually also benefit other people. Like
Yeah.
people all kind of want
Well,
for themselves, and somehow,
ultimate.
some way, we're able to peacefully coexist
Yeah.
on the
Ultimately,
daily.
altruism is self-serving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You somehow get something back from that in
Even if
some
it's
way.
even if it's long term, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're playing the long game. You get
Yeah.
instead
It
of
may not
taking
be
the
direct, but like if you let somebody go ahead of you in the line at the grocery store, maybe you avoid a fatal car accident by two
mm-hmm.
seconds. Like whether you know it or not, like altruism is probably paying you back pretty well.
I actually almost think that kind of behavior is genetic. In
Oh, it is
societies,
absolutely a
yeah,
genetic thing.
societies that possess that trait flourish.
Altruism, I'll tell you exactly how altruism is genetic, biological, like totally explained. It's something that you are readily willing to do for family,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Yeah.
And that in itself is preserving your genetic line, even
Mm-hmm.
if it's not you surviving as an individual. The genes that you share with your family,
Mm-hmm.
with your like people, let's say, um, and you can be altruistic to people in your neighborhood, and there's a pretty good chance that you share a lot of genes with people in your neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
if you think about it, right?
Well, and even from a survival standpoint too, it's like maybe if we think about it from a time in the past, so you perform an altruistic act for your neighbor, and that puts a little bit of credit, I guess, into your pool.
Mm-hmm.
And when you now need help, your neighbor remembers, oh that guy, he's so
Mm-hmm.
nice. The time when he
Mm-hmm.
came and helped me with that door on my barn, like, and now you're struggling with something, and they're like, oh, let me help you with that. And
That too.
ultimately, you both benefit. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody benefits from that because now people are trading nothing for their labor.
Yeah.
Like the it, or maybe something eventually comes back your way, like you go knock on your neighbor's house that you helped with the barn door, and you're like, hey, you have any extra sugar? I'm trying to cook something. They're like, oh yeah, go ahead. But maybe if
Yeah.
you didn't do that, they'd be like, oh yeah, no, I don't have any sugar, because there hasn't you haven't built
Yeah.
up that rapport with that person.
Ultimately, kindness costs either nothing or it costs very little.
Well, and the kind of joy you get from kindness, people spend fortunes to achieve.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, the 10 minutes out of my day that gives me all this happiness is worth this guy's 50-year journey to be able to find this happiness and joy.
Yeah.
Like, hey, might actually save you money and time. Well, we're coming up on the 2 hour mark now.
Oh
So
wow.
I think we're going to make this a two-parter.
Well, that means this is episode 250.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Whoa.
Jesus. That's crazy.
But yeah, we definitely like went into a lot of stuff
Man, this
and
is going to
there's
sprout a lot of discussion, I hope.
yeah. I even actually like just created like an Excel spreadsheet format
Mhm.
for like marking where in episodes certain things occur because like it's at episode 250 it's getting really hard to keep track of like where did we talk about
I know.
this
Ugh.
and that, and like where's a good place to stick in a commercial or something, like
Oh, hey, that's where AI analysis would be pretty handy.
yeah, but in the absence of that, I became my own AI and created a spreadsheet for that. So, like, so hopefully, like, we can, keep track of stuff and like create, great teaser videos because like people generally don't watch 2 hours of the show, but like there tends to be like great gold nuggets at the end of stuff because we've had so much beer.
Exactly. Hmm.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully, people will catch on to that and
Hmm.
become mega fans and watch every single minute of our content.
Binge all of it.
Yes.
Yes. And don't
Yes.
forget to go to Patreon and give us some
That's right.
some ducats.
Patreon.com/KSM Vidcast. We write our own music, we put it up there, and you can listen to it. It's on Spotify and iTunes and all that.
Yep.
Good shit.
And maybe we can make this a career someday.
Maybe. If you want this to be our career so we put out even more awesome content, you should definitely donate at patreon.com/KSM.
Definitely. Well,
Do it. Do it.
And perhaps, if humanity has achieved sufficient maturity to utilize the power of the device, the ultimate age of ALTAiR has yet to be witnessed.